I welcome you all on the behalf of Office of Doctoral Studies, OP Jindal Global University. It's a great day because today in the morning we are going to start with the meaningful discussion. Now there are many more things which is being discussed and taught in the course curriculum, in the course plan, in the coursework stays in the PhD. But yes, you all will be agreeing that there are many more things which we don't teach. So today we have Professor Raja Sankaran. He is going to talk about what they don't teach in PhD. I'm really thankful to Professor Raja for accepting the offer for speaking for the students. Professor Raja is a PhD from IIM-Ranchi. He's a professor of marketing management in ISME, that's Indian School of Management Excellence, Bangalore. He has more than 30 to 35 years of research and industry experience. He holds positions in the MNC. So he's the person who brings industry, academia, interface all together. His industry experience as well as academia experience, where he has published a lot of research paper in so-called A-star, ABDC listed journals from the areas. And he also got awarded Best Researcher Award, Best Research Paper Award in many of conferences. He also presented in Jamnalal Bajaj Institute of Management Institute, and there also he got a lot of appreciations and Best Paper Research Award. He actually, his PhD thesis was comprises of both qualitative and quantitative. He's the guy who can give you an idea about the mixed methodology design. He'll talk about various type of the dilemma, research dilemma, and he'll also tell you that what are the hurdles and what are the problems coming during this journey and how to how to get rid from those problems. I'll request all the students that what we plan that is going to be an interactive session. So Professor Sankaran, he'll discuss initially a few slides and discuss, and then we'll give you a way out and come forward. Don't hesitate. Whatever questions you're having in your mind, don't think that this question is not right or if this platform is not right to ask this question. Feel free to ask any question. Don't hesitate, because in this journey there are a lot of things which is not being told. So I think this is an opportunity, so that you can discuss, you can put forward your ideas here. I'm really thankful to you, Professor Raja, for sparing time from your busy schedule and talking to the students. And this shows that how dedicated you are for the research and the research journey. So I'll formally open it, the platform for you. I'll request you to share your screen and start presenting it, Scott, sir.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, Professor Pandey, and thank you so much for all the kind words that you had spoken about. It's really a pleasure for me to be here and share some of the knowledges and experience that I have gone through as part of the PhD process. And as Professor Pandey mentioned, this you can ask any questions, any hurdles that you're facing throughout your PhD journey. I'll be more than happy to address those questions. Whichever I cannot, I will take it on board and send back the responses. But most of the things is something that we would be able to go through as part of this PhD journey and address them. So I would really encourage all those who are present as part of this session to ask questions. It's not a typical kind of workshop that we go through regularly. I put in together all the pointers by which we should be able to go through the complete journey as part of this process. I was mentioning I would go through first the dilemma, followed by some aspects about the motivational. Then I will open up for the questions, and then I will go through some of the tips and tricks. So some of the tips will already be covered in the previous two perspectives, but I will cover some additional 14 pointers, which are tips and tricks for the research scholars. And this does include about the overall journey as a research scholar. Some basic housekeeping. Please make sure that you all keep your audio off, and there will be ample time for the question answer session as well. And if you need to ask any questions while I'm presenting in, please do feel free to raise them. The moderator would cue you in. If I start with the dilemma, as I will share some of my experiences as well, and as well as, each one of us go through different phases during the research process. At the beginning, what kind of dilemma did I have? Okay, so my major thing was about which university to join in. I come from a rich industry background. So from industry to academia, what kind of differences does it bring into? What kind of values would each of these, if I do a PhD from a university, what kind of value would it provide? Okay, then comes in about the reputation. For example, some of you would be starting your PhD journey at a very young age, and you would be in a position wherein you would have published papers. And if I come with a 50+ age, what kind of, how do I build my reputation over a period of time with respect to having publications? And the experience by itself does bring in a lot of those nitty-gritties with respect to what academic writing is versus the kind of industry approach of dealing with various perspectives. What kind of future prospects or the financial implications? Similarly, if you are into say NET or JRF, you might be getting some excitement. If you're on an executive PhD mode, you would be paying some of the fee, which does bring in its own financial implications. And then getting into the research does bring in some of these challenges with respect to having quantitative as well as qualitative methods and approaches. How do I, person who does not have any exposure and in-depth experience about it, how do I develop them? How do I work with theories? How do I manage and analyze the data? Irrespective of whether you're using a qualitative or a quantitative approach, you, when I say you, as a research scholar, we all are required to, be comfortable with the data, handling the data, as well as understanding about what should be the approach in order to work with these. Having said that, the very first thing is there is a key differentiator when it comes into the PhD versus a master's or a bachelor's degree. If we talk about the kind of education that we normally have in, we have a different approach when we are, we attain till a bachelor's or a master's degree. As soon as we come into a PhD, the world changes. So what kind of differentiating factor does it bring into? First is, in case of if I talk about, say, graduate or an undergraduate or a postgraduate, we all have a clearly defined syllabus. Whereas in case of a PhD, there is no syllabus. The approach is totally different with respect to how the examination is held, what kind of coursework are being done. Though we do have some sort of term papers as part of the PhD. In case of the graduates and all, we have got a well-established knowledge, and it is something that we look into more of applicability of those knowledge, whereas in PhD, we need to do a research which has got a value associated with it, be it a theoretical implication or the managerial implication, or some leading to the policy development. In case of graduation, again, we've got a clear-cut timetable, whereas in PhD, it's a loose timetable. Why we call it as a loose timetable is because the day when we join, the day when we are a doctorate, there would be a difference. Some could do in 3 years, some could do in 5 years, some take even a decade's time. So there are no clear-cut defined timelines with respect to the process by itself. In case of a graduate, it's a cumulative grade. So you keep on accumulating, and what you get at the end of, say, 2 years or the 3 years is the grade. Whereas in case of PhD, it's one exam, which is the final of what we call it as a difference. So the standardized exam in case of graduate versus the difference. Again, in case of a graduate, it's a local competition. So it's within the university or the college that we are working in. Whereas in case of PhD, it's a global competition. Why? Because just imagine if my one of the milestones I need to write research papers as part of the ABDC journal. I have got a publication in a journal. Who are the reviewers? The reviewers could be anywhere in the world. Similarly, when I submit my thesis, it will be evaluated by the examiners. It can go to anybody in the world. So hence, my competition is not limited only to the local, within the university or within the state or within the country. It's a global competition which I need to cater to. In case of graduation, there are many teachers, whereas PhD, one supervisor. One is the main person who's the supervisor or the guide. In case of graduation, again, there are a lot of spoon feeding. In case of PhD, it is all self-motivation, how an individual can work through the process. So it's a discovery process, and a lot of times it becomes just an iterative process as well, because the way the data collection is done, the results that we get, sometimes we might need to go back and redo some of those steps. So it's quite an iterative process. So the PhD does bring in a lot of challenges along with it as compared to any of the previous master's or a bachelor's degree kind of education that we have. Now, if I talk about the journey, the approach would be, I'm bringing up with a very standardized approach, which is being used as part of the PhD journey, but this could vary from one university to the other or from one country to the other. The word of caution is, all that I talk about here as part of this, make sure that you follow the guidelines which are set up by the university. So bringing up at a very high level overview about the journey, the first is about the different coursework, or what we call it also as the different subjects that we go through in terms. How many terms, how many subjects, again, these are defined by the different universities. So do follow those guidelines. And what we are required as part of the journey is to clear them at each of the stages. There could be a comprehensive examination. Then we identify who the thesis advisory committee would be, or the supervisors, submit a research proposal. There would be a research proposal seminar. Justification is very, very critical from the point of view of, as a research scholar, everything that we do, we need to ensure that we have an appropriate rationale associated with the steps that we are taken in. So that's why I put it as a separate pointer here, so that the emphasis is given on the rationale. Any method that I use, any data collection I use, any sample that I use, be it the sampling techniques, for each and every purpose, I need to ensure that I give a justification. Then comes the methodology. So if I talk about methodology, again, the methodology would, how do I close this? Do you see this panel in while I'm presenting in?
We can see this journey of PhD process.
Okay, I'm getting this. I think this is of Zoom panel. I'm getting it here. How do I close this?
Can minimize probably that.
No, I have a lot of buttons in here. It's actually part of my, okay, I don't know if
you can click on escape button, which is on left corner side on above, to minimize the screen.
Okay. Which button did you say I should click on?
ESC.
Escape button. No. I don't see any escape in here.
Sir, left side corner above.
Okay. Oh, it's still visible for me. As soon as I share the screen, it comes in. So
you can try double click on screen. It might work.
Okay. No, if I click, it goes to the next step. No, it doesn't. I'm still seeing that. Waiting info. No, it's a bit still there on my screen. It's not minimized. I wish I could minimize this. Okay, let's see. Okay, the next part over here is about the methodology. Now, in the methodology, if I talk about, we could use a qualitative or a quantitative technique, bringing in some of the conceptual model, and then identify what sort of data collection that we do, as well as some of the result analysis. So I'll quickly, briefly go through this model, and then I'll come back into the different steps. So the model could be, this is typically from UT-AUT2, which is a unified theory of adoption and use of technology by Venkatesh et al. And this model was conceptualized in 2012, which is an updation or an extension of UT-AUT model. which is predominantly used in different marketing as well as IT domains. And this model, the reason I've taken this as an example is to explain or understand about how do we conceptualize the models. What we can do is the different methods to conceptualize the model could be taking a base as a model and then identifying which could be the new exogenous mechanisms that could be added on to this. So to the existing 7 different factors or the predictors, what could be added on? We could also add a new endogenous mechanism. So along with the existing factors, I add an additional endogenous factor. Similarly, the next could be with respect to adding additional moderating variables. So what the model talks about is gender, age, and experience. I can have a separate one. For example, if you want to determine from the cultural perspective, I could use it. Or if you want to do something from the usage perspective, high and low, I could use that. So based upon the way that I conceptualize the model, I can add additional moderating variables. Similarly, I can also add additional outcome variables. Now, these are the different consequences that could be brought into from the behavioral pattern. For example, if I want to understand, apart from the adoption behavior, what leads to the satisfaction as well as loyalty of the consumers? So that could be an additional to this model, which could be added on as an outcome mechanism. So different methods by which we could extend it. Then comes about the other steps could be, as part of the process, we would be required to publish the research papers. Now, how many, where, and why do we need to publish? Again, there are guidelines from the universities that needs to be followed in. For example, ABDC journals or UGC journals, how many conference presentations should be done? Then the final one comes in with the thesis submission. With the spiral bind as well as it is binded actually, which is the final bound of the thesis. Then examiners are identified, both internal and external examiners. It could be at the time of evaluation of the thesis as well as during the process by which they come in for the final defense. Then comes in the actual final defense, which is the most critical part during this journey. As a research scholar, we need to understand the format of the defense. For example, whether it is within the university or is it open for the public to join in, how many examiners would come in, both internal and examiners, and get some idea about each of this by joining any of the forthcoming seminars which are held within your university. And then comes the future scope of teaching. So this gives the overall journey with respect to the PhD. One quick question, if you all can type it in the chat or specify what is missing in this whole journey. The question is, what is missing in this journey? Can you all hear me? Akash?
So we can hear you.
Sir, yes, sir, we can hear you.
So in this whole journey, what do you think is missing? One component, one critical component or one crucial component. I'm getting some messages on the chat box. Very good. Who's this? Sanjay Chaudhary. Very good, Sanjay. Yeah, that's the part which
Sujay ji is mentioned about literature review, whereas Rajesh Nandkumar ji, he mentioned about the research question.
Okay, so literature review is the very key component during this journey. We do a lot of emphasis on the literature review, and the reason is, some of you rightly said, be the research questions that we define, or we identify the research gaps, or we conceptualize the model, or we understand how should I go about in working as part of my research. Everything is based upon the literature. So there are a lot of questions which comes into our mind as well. When do we start and when do we stop? So typically the starting point is whenever you started the journey. As soon as you get into the mode of getting into a PhD, either for seeking the admission or you have to present anything, you need to start with the literature. And the time by which the literature review should be stopped is till the time you have a final bound of your thesis. how there are a lot of questions which might come in, which I would address a bit later on. But typically it starts from the very beginning in the journey and it ends till the time you have your thesis final bound. Okay, very important component associated with this journey. Then comes about the different perspective of, as a research scholar, as an individual, I can get stuck at different places. What should I do and how should I come out of it? It's a very good graphical representation what we see here. So when a person starts in and what the person comes out as. So the word of caution, though it is in a very graphical format, a word of caution is do not get old. You are young, come out young. So there could be a lot of hurdles that we would go through as part of this journey, and it's actually a maze. Don't get lost into this maze. You need to identify the different solutions on how do we cater to some of these hurdles that comes in, how do we cross them, or how do we avoid them? What are the do's and don'ts associated with this? And it should be a pleasant journey. Identify the different approaches whenever you're stuck. Where are all points that you could stuck with, and what should you be doing as part? So I'll go through some 7-8 pointers associated with this. The very first thing is get to know the literature. It's easily said than done. For example, if you want to understand how do I search for the literatures, how do I identify the different literatures which are relevant for my study, which are not relevant. There could be millions of literatures which are existing. I need to be in a position to identify which ones are relevant and which are not. It's not simply, as part of your thesis, creating a telephone directory. I hope you all understand what telephone directory is. It should not be simply, creating a telephone directory similar to a telephone directory and citing the literatures. It should not be that. So very, very relevant perspective needs to be included. What should be included? What should not be included should be known. The key thing, what we also try to understand is about how do I read a literature? If I'm given a particular research paper, how do I read that? How do I then identify the notes associated with? How do I use it? How do I do a synthesis of the literature? Similarly, writing, how do I go about writing my research paper, writing my thesis? There are a lot of these nitty-gritties which needs to be known. Again, if I compare with industry and academics, it's different ball game of how do we write in case of an industry versus the academics. So academics is very, very peculiar in order to understand this. We'll quickly go through, not only about where I'm stuck, but some tips associated with this. This is one of the approach. Okay, if I talk about analytical approach of reviewing the literatures, this is one of the approach. This is not the only approach. This is something which is from Zaitmal of 2000. The analytical approach to review the articles are read the relevant theories, identify the different conceptual models as well as the review papers and the empirical studies associated with this. This would be the first steps associated with it. Now, today what we are talking about is typically the journey and what all should come in as part of this journey. So I'll provide the complete framework of the whole thing. I won't go into too much of nitty-gritties and detail about each of them, but I'm more than happy to elaborate if you've got any specific questions associated with this. The step number 2 is read, review, and critically analyze them. So that's the main purpose of a research scholar. It is not simply saying that A said this and B said this and C said this and simply put them as part of your thesis. But you should be in a position to synthesize the literature and critically analyze and provide a framework associated with it. And then identify the outcomes at which phase that you are making use of this literature review, the knowledge gap. Okay, so that's all about the literature, the approach to be used. Reading papers, so you have to use a methodology by which you keep yourself updated with the happenings around. You should be able to subscribe to some of these journal articles, identify which journals are quite relevant, make use of them as part of your whole journey. And you must have a habit of reading them consistently. It's not happen that only at time of literature if you have done this and then you have forgotten about it. No, it should be throughout the journey. If I go back to the previous slide, till the time you submit your, not only submission, till the time you bind your thesis, your literature review process continues. So make sure that you are in a position to read through your literatures on regular basis and consistently. Thoroughly as well as identify which papers which are relevant as I've gone through, and choice of databases, multiple databases. So you need to be in a position to again understand about which databases should I be using. Should I use Web of Science? Should I use Scopus? Should I use Science Direct? And for each of them, you should also be in a position to identify the good research papers and make use of them. Then comes, how do you structure your literature? There are many approaches. Again, this is not the only approach. I'm giving some examples associated with it. It could be done either in a chronological order, in a thematic form, in the methodological order, or in a theoretical framework. Now, chronological is simply talking about, based upon the years. So I have sorted them based upon their publication, who said what kind of thing is what we would use it for. That's one approach. Second is based upon the different themes. So identify what kind of approach would you be using in as part of your study, as part of your research papers, or as part of your thesis. Make use of them which are very appropriate. Again, I would always emphasize on always make use of synthesis of literatures by which so that you can organize them appropriately. For example, use different theories that you have identified as part of your study. One theory, multiple theories. Why are you using some of these theories and the rationale associated with them? So you need to have a substantial justification for making use of them as well. So this is one, if we talk about the approaches on the concept-centric approach or an author-centric approach. Author-centric would be author A said this, author B said this, which concepts are they used? Or it could be based upon the different concepts for each of the research papers, who said what, and then do your synthesis accordingly. The third could be based upon the concept metrics which are augmented with unit of analysis. Of what this unit of analysis could be, for example, in the HR domain, they could make use of something on the organization level, at the group level, at the individual level. So for each of the literatures, identify the different unit of analysis and then do your literature study in order to do a synthesis and identify some of the rationale associated. Another approach could be using the theoretical framework or the model. So we use multiple models and then identify what are commonality amongst them, what kind of constructs or the factors are used, and then derive in order to provide a rationale of both the literature review that you are working on, as well as when you're building your conceptual model, as well as doing a hypothesis in order to. So different approaches and different frameworks on how to structure your literature review. Second is about the academic writing. Academic writing itself is a different ballgame. When I entered into the academics, we are not taught on how do we write research papers. And this is something which is required while writing your thesis as well. There are certain things with respect to plagiarisms. I will come into this a bit later on. And how do we paraphrase? So we need to write in our own language. And then similarly, when we are writing our research papers or thesis, each one of us get into a blockage, something known as a struggle to find some of the words. What should be the right word to use? Whether I should use this or should I use what? There could be a kind of bottleneck which comes into. So we need to understand about this and how do we come out of it. So in terms of academic writing by itself, there are different types. One is descriptive, second is analytical, third is persuasive, and fourth is critical. Whenever we talk about writing the literature's review as well as doing it as part of thesis, we must make use of critical method in order to write the literature reviews. Again, because this is something by which we would be critically analyzing about the different models, identifying the rationale associated with it, and giving a justification of why this model is suitable for my study. Or similarly, if I'm using any of these statistical tools, again, you need to know about why did I use this, why not any other type of statistical tool that I've been using it for. So the critical analysis is again very, very important from the point of view of academic. The third thing which comes into our mind is, should I use qualitative approach of my study, or should I use quantitative? What are the advantages and disadvantages with each of them? How do I go ahead with the methodology? What kind of approaches should I use? If I need some software, so some tools, how do I make use of the tools? Where do I get them from? Similarly, data collection by itself is a different ballgame of ensuring that I've got the correct data by which I should be able to get results. Should I use the survey method? Should I use the interview method? What kind of advantage and disadvantages comes against each one of them? Again, there are different methodologies associated with each. For example, if we talk about the sampling techniques, as a research scholar, we need to give justification of if I use something. For example, if I use quota sampling or if I use convenience sampling, you simply can't just say I've used A, B, or C. You need to give a rationale of why have I used a particular sampling method as well as part of it. So a lot of things which comes into the play. In the analysis, which statistical tool should I use? For example, if I talk about only quantitative techniques, if I'm using structural equation modeling, I need to first of all give a justification of why am I using structural equation modeling? Why not regression? And similarly, if I talk about the tools, should I use SPSS-MR? Should I use PLSEM? Should I use EDANCO? Should I use R? And why? And comes the training. Okay, a lot of things that you could get with simply a click of a button, but you should be in a position to infer, draw inferences out of the results. And why, if something goes wrong, why is it not coming correct? So you need to know the technique behind simply, not just getting the results and not being able to understand the references or how and why has it done. Similarly, if anything goes wrong, and let me tell you this, things goes wrong during the research journey. I have done 4 different studies as part of my PhD. The first one was a qualitative and the rest 3 were quantitative studies. So in one of my studies, I got stuck with not getting the results. So I had to go back and collect the data again. So I had to increase my sample size by in order to make sure that I get some meaningful results. So there could be times by which the results can go wrong. It could be in the conceptual model. It could be to understand, for example, if I'm using a second order construct, it's not simply because I've created a conceptual model, but I need to prove it statistically as well. Why am I using a second order construct as part of my structural equation modeling? So there are stages by which things can go wrong, and we should be in a position to understand about if things goes wrong, what should I do? And if I get stuck, whom should I contact? Whom could I seek help from? And then the 5th point is about the research papers. As a PhD scholar or as an academician, we all are required to publish papers. We all handle rejections, but the key thing is, don't get dejected because there is a rejection. Let me tell you this, worldwide, even if you attend any of the conferences or any of the webinars, any of the FPPs, every research scholar would state, when I talk about research scholars, including academicians, because at the end of the day, everybody publishes. There is nobody who could get a clear sale. So the process is quite tedious with respect to publishing the research papers. Hence, everybody goes through the rejection. Once, twice, 5 times, 10 times, it depends upon the quality of the paper and what we're doing. But the bottom line is everybody goes through a rejection while we are publishing the paper. So do not get dejected by the publishing of the research paper. Now, the key things are about the selection of the journals as well as the peer review process, which something should be known for. The first and foremost thing is, how do we choose a particular journal? Always understand the difference between the credible journals as well as the predatory journals. Predatory are the ones, those who would give a warm welcome with a red carpet welcome. They say, you come and publish with me. It will be a quick sale through 1 month, 2 months. Within a week, you will get yours published. Do not fall under this trap. It's a big, big business what they are getting into. Please do not fall under this trap. At any age group that you are in or any stage of the research that you are in, avoid predatory journals, because it is you and your work, your hard efforts which would be at stake. Always going for credible journals. The process by itself comes with different hurdles. You talk about the peer reviews, double blind peer reviews, the number of revisions that you have go through, desk rejects or rejection at any of the phases. These are the hurdles that we have to go through. But at the outcome, what you will get is a good quality paper which will be published in journals. So always choose the right path. Do not fall into the trap of the predatory journals. It's a, as I said, it's a big business which is booming. You call them as predatory, hijacked, or different categories of these journals. And this is a very interesting research which was done by Buchanan, in which I hope you all understand about what is bait and sting, and also he used this kind of approach in order to understand where these publishers are, where the actual payment moves as well. For example, if they charge 1,500 rupees or 2,000 or 10,000 rupees for publishing a paper, where actually are they located and where the movement of this money transaction happens. It's very interesting to understand, you know. So what he did was he created some bogus research papers and sent it across to 255 journals all across the world. And this is the map. What is interesting to find from this map is you'll find the kind of concentration that it brings in India as compared to other parts of the world. There are some places, you know, but India is a big business for them. So please do not fall under this trap. Avoid getting into any of the journals which are predatory in nature. And there are many such forums which exist with respect to identifying about these not good journals. So whenever you are publishing your papers, please publish only in the journals which are worthwhile. Okay, that comes about the peer review process by itself. You should be aware about what actually happens, and I'll give a very brief, quick snapshot associated with the peer review process. So whenever you submit your manuscript, it goes through multiple review process from the editorial board. So the very first level of rejection could be what is known as the desk reject, in which if the manuscript does not meet with the journal's objectives or the journal's criteria or the aims and scope of the particular journal, in that case it might be just desk rejected, which typically happens much quicker. Sometimes it happens within an hour's time or within a couple of days' time, that it could be desk rejected. The second is in which the editor, there is an editorial board with each of these journals, and they would select 2 or 3 reviewers. And how do they select them? Based upon the manuscript. If they find it to be useful, which is something of something which does provide a value across based upon the aims and scope of the journal, they would then identify the reviewers to whom it is then sent in for. The reviewers will then provide their recommendations, and then eventually the editor would make the final decision. Okay, now, these kind of recommendations that could be at different stages again could be is, one is the very first thing is reject. That means if they found major flaws with respect to the methodology or any of the structuring of the research paper that I would be talking about, if it doesn't fulfill those, then it could be rejected. The second is they could send in for revisions, by which it could be minor or major modifications which are being recommended by the reviewers. If it goes in for the process of revision, the editor would send it back to the authors, and the author would then make revisions and then submit this paper back to the journal, which again goes back to the same process. That means there would be the reviewers who will again evaluate and then provide the recommendations. At the final stage, what it comes into is the acceptance, and that's where you can enjoy and have some kind of treat. Okay? If the paper gets accepted in the journal. The review process, in which there is something known as a single blind review or a double blind review or a triple blind review. But eventually, based upon the process that we go through is, as I said, it's quite a hurdle. There are a lot of bottlenecks that we have to come across. And when you send it to the good journals, who the reviewer could be, you don't know. So the blind review process, wherein the reviewer could be placed anywhere in the world, and they are specialists in the kind of field that they are working in. So you could get a lot of comments which you need to work on in order to revise your research paper or a manuscript. So that's about the peer review process. Then comes about the thesis writing, chapterization and all, which I'll cover a little bit later when I come into the different tips. But the key perspective is, do not think that you will be able to write your thesis within a month's time at the end. Never ever do that. So always focus on going from 0 to 100. So don't focus on going from, so if you want to travel from say 0.0 till 100% completion for it, So don't think that you can do it within a short span of time. So take small steps. These steps will help in order to reach to the goal. So for example, focus on going from 0 to 10, then 10 to 20, 20 to 30. So have your milestones set and build on this sustainable habit throughout the PhD journey or throughout the process by taking these gradual steps or gradual progression. And as I always emphasize on that, it is a journey that we have to go through as part of this process. So make sure that you are consistent enough during this whole journey. The last point I have as part of this slide is where I could get stuck is during this as a research scholar or as when we take admissions, and during this journey by itself, there are assumptions being taken, and there are lots of assumptions. Right from literature review, right from writing the thesis, right from publishing the paper, there are a lot of such assumptions being taken. The first and foremost is novelty. How do you find what is novel? There are a lot of things that comes in, to define that my research stands apart. So how do you define this? You have identified a research problem, but how do you convince that nothing has been done before? So the key is simply identifying something like this doesn't mean it is unique or it has a novel approach. If you look into this kind of stack that we have, what kind of relevance does it have? Does it have any implications to the society or to the academia? That's again very critical to understand. You can't simply say, oh, mine is a novel approach because I've designed it in a different way. That will not solve the objective. It must have a relevance associated with whatever you identify. Understanding the supervisor and the role is again very, very critical. There are a lot of those softer aspects which needs to be covered for. So it has to be something that you will be working with a supervisor throughout this journey. Hence, you need to look for them as a guide, as a facilitator, not as a bottleneck in order to come with this particular stage. Then go beyond what is known. For example, whenever we work in management domain, I hope most of you are from management domain, but in various domain also that we look in for, it is all multidimensional in nature. If I talk about management by itself, or marketing, or even if I drill down further to consumer behavior, there are a lot of theories which are drawn from psychology, from sociology. So we have to look for other perspectives as well in order to understand about which concept should I use in for, which models, which theories do I need to use in for. So don't be very narrow approach. Look for something which is much beyond for what is known or what is within the domain. As a scholar, okay, now I'm talking from the research scholar perspective. So some of the bottlenecks which could come in is about managing. Okay, the managing could talk from various perspectives. It could be, for example, quite unprepared while getting into the PhD batch. So that means at the initial phase itself, we do not know how should I proceed in for, because there is no spoon feeding in here. There are a lot of things which comes in by the self-motivation, self-triggered. And how do I make sure that I do not have 100% dependency on my guide? What is that I should be working for? When should I approach? When should I not approach? So there are a lot of these nitty-gritties which has to be looked into. So hence I would talk about the managing an individual by themselves. Or it could be, meeting at the right time, ensuring that you've got regular meetings with your scholars as well as with your guide, with your supervisors, with your based upon the milestones that you have to meet with. How would you go about with that? And then thinking ahead. So what typically this means is you need to keep the end goal in mind, not simply looking in for what should be the next step. So not only for today what you're doing in, but keeping the end goal in mind, you need to look in from the perspective of how do I go about this particular approach. Be good communicator, develop the knowledge, and then reading is again very, very critical. I can understand, you need to work on multiple perspectives. There could be some tasks given, courses. If you're doing on an executive PhD, you will be having your work as well as your family life. You have to manage about each one of them and look looking for. But it has to be a consistent effort. So what I would always emphasize on is the incremental progress. Make sure that you are taking steps adequately on regular basis. The other thing which comes into the mind is, okay, I've created my conceptual model. I worked on something. Should I present it? Where should I present? Should I present in a conference? If somebody steals my idea or my research, then what should I do for? So these are various bottlenecks or the points or the issues that we all come across as a research scholar, and we need to find some solutions so that we don't. I'll go back to this picture. We don't fall into any of these traps and get trapped into this maze. The next step, what I would come out with about the motivational perspective. If we talk about the journey by itself, the whole journey is a lonely process. You are, you are left alone in a way that you need to you need to work with your brains, come up with a lot of these, because it's eventually your baby, if I talk about the whole research, and you need to nurture it in order to come up with the results. So ensure that you understand the whole process, you understand the journey, and looking for the ways to keep self-motivated. How could you do that? Is join different forums. These forums could be, for example, the kind of networking that you have made as part of the workshops that you join in, FDPs, friends, peers, your different research scholars, different webinars that you join in, conferences, forums. So there are a lot of such avenues which are available that you could make use of them. And always try to learn and learn the right thing. Again, I will cover some of these in the tips as well, and present your work. So whenever you present your work, there could be a lot of criticism. So please do not take it as if somebody is putting you down. Take it with a pinch of salt. The same happens whenever you are submitting a research paper to the journals as well. You could get a lot of comments that you need to work through, and these are the hurdles that comes in as part of the process. This will enable you to produce a quality work, managing the task and connecting with peers, friends, family, and share the information as well as knowledge with peers. Another way to keep yourself motivated is identify a mentor. Okay, apart from what you are working on, if you get stuck somewhere, you need to understand whom should I seek help from, who is the right person who can guide me. So have a mentor during your journey, and make use of this mentor in order to make sure that your process is much easier to sail. You can also work in collaboration with, apart from your guide, with other research scholars and other individuals, so that you have that kind of knowledge in order to provide quality work. And think from your own perspective, saying that I'm fabulous. Don't let yourself down with any of the stumbling blocks that you get through during this process. And if you simply Google in how to write a PhD, you'll get millions of such results. So look for the right information, make sure that you have the right sort of information. A few more slides on the motivational aspect. As we all know that our thoughts manifest into action. So the key perspective is, well, with the kind of peer group that I'm part of. So ensure that you have got the right people, those who could energize yourself. If you are with a peer group which only talks demotivational, you would also be demotivated. So, and that's what I have it on the right hand side in this particular picture. So choose carefully about who the peers are, whom you would be working with, and you must be energized in order to get bogged down into this. If I tell you one quick thing is, don't think that monkey is eating an ice cream. I again repeat, all of you, those who are present in this conference today, how many 55 participants we have, don't think that monkey is eating an ice cream. Let me ask, what did you think? How many of you thought that monkey is eating an ice cream, and how many did not? Can you quickly message in? Can you all hear me? Am I audible? It's a question for you all.
Interesting question. Please reply.
Yeah. Yeah. So if I say don't think, each one of us is tend to think only that. Okay, that's a crux of the issue here. So the mind will
Gauri
think
says yes, I did.
only that is. No, that's the human being, that's the human tendency. That's what we all are actually thinking. Even if you tell me, even I would also do the same thing. As soon as you say, don't think of a monkey eating an ice cream, that's the first thought which will come to us. So, so the key perspective is whenever we get demotivated, whenever we get bombarded with a lot of those information that we should not be interested in, forcefully come out of it. So drag your mind and consciously bring it back to the focus. There are various ways by which you could do it. Some people have got an approach of meditating or simply, sitting down in a silent environment. Which approach works best for you is something that you as an individual need to look at for. You can, because as a human being, there are no manuals. Unlike a machine which tells you, okay, how you should do, how you should handle. There is nothing absolutely. There are a lot of studies which are done from the psychological perspective as well as from the, if a medical is a different field altogether, neurosystems and all. So we need to look in for the methods by which we could calm down ourselves and bring back to the focus. Which works best for an individual, try to figure out. If meditation works, spend 5 minutes or 10 minutes each day to meditate in order to make sure that you are in a position to bring back to the focus. Then the other key thing about the approach and to keep motivated is about the relationship. These relationships could be with anyone, with peers, with your supervisors, with your guide, with your peer groups, with your work environment. It could be at a different phases again that we go through as part of it. So it's all about the soft skills and how do we manage. The key pointer is that there could be a lot of new things that we go through as part of this journey, new softwares, new tools, new methodology, new approach, presentations, multiple forums that we want to present in for conferences, the kind of comments that we get in. So do not get bogged down. Look in for what kind of hurdles are these and how do we cross them. The key thing is, again, if we talk about a sand particle, the more closer that we keep near our eyes, it will blind our vision. So avoid keeping anything which is close to your eyes. Keep it at a distance, and I'm sure that you will be able to overcome these hurdles. Okay, can't do it, please remove this not from this and make it as I can do it. A quick motivation. As a research scholar, this is again very, very critical, because in this journey, you need to make sure that you do not lose on your mental health. There has to be a balance between the whole journey by itself, because we will be bogged down by our professional environment, by our studies, by our family. There would be a lot of things which will go through, and the journey by itself is not an easy one. There will be a lot of hurdles that we need to go through. So please have this kind of balance during this process. I will quickly pause here and I will open up for the questions. And then I will start with the last part of the presentation about the different tips for the research scholars. Okay.
So, sir, there is a question by Parth, and he's asking that whether part-time PhD is a good idea or a full-time, which is a better option, according to you.
Okay, no, I won't say which one is better and which one is not. If you want to compare it between full-time and a part-time, because there are a lot of dynamics involved in it. Let me stop sharing and if I can see the phases as well. Okay, so there are a lot of dynamics involved in it. For example, if I'm a working professional, I'm hard-pressed on time. I'm hard-pressed on finances. I would rather continue with my PhD while I'm working rather than looking in for the other things. So instead of completing in 3 years, I can say, okay, I can compromise on the time factor, say 4 years or 5 years, I should be able to complete. There are a lot of dynamics that will be involved in. See, typically when we talk about as an individual, we need to take care of our family, be it parents, be it our spouses or the children's. A lot of dynamics comes into it. So it's not simply saying which one is better and which one is not. You need to evaluate as an individual about which is best option for you as a full-time or as a part-time. I've seen people quitting their job, doing PhD, and then coming back into either academics or in the industry. I've seen people doing it along with their work profile as well. So both works well. But my only thing is never go into an approach of which takes 7 years to 10 years and all. Either you're working on a full-time or a part-time, make sure that you have end goal in place. That is very, very critical from this journey point. I hope that answers your question. I can't simply say yes or no, okay?
So there are a couple of questions, and Lavanya, would you like to ask by unmuting yourself, and or should I?
Sure. Good morning, sir. So thank you so much for the wonderful session. Sir, actually, I wanted to ask that how should we plan our thesis chapters? Like, for example, I have decided that I'll be working on work engagement. And my first study I have thought of is that I would be studying on the antecedents. That what are the different antecedents of work engagement. So how should I go on the second chapter? How should I decide that what would be my second chapter and then third chapter? So any best practices for that, or any book or paper which suggests any best practices for that?
Okay, very good question, Lavanya. We all go through this kind of bottleneck on the chapterization of the thesis by itself. Okay. I will be covering this in the tips. Most probably this should answer your point, wherein I'll give a broad guidelines about how do you structure your thesis and what should be the components of it. Having said that, that particular guideline is based upon one study. For example, mine was 4 studies. So the structuring will again change according to what you are doing in part. But if it is a single study, there are some standardized guidelines that you could follow in about how do you structure your thesis. I'll be covering that as part of the tips and tricks. So if it doesn't cover, then please do raise your question again. I will be opening up again at the end for the.
Sure, sir. Thank you.
Cherry, if you want to ask your question.
Good morning, sir. Sir, thank you for a very, very good session. It is very, very helpful, especially for me or people like us who basically are in the year 1. We've just started our part-time PhD. So thank you. My question is, sir, how to identify predator journals than credible journals? And should we prepare a list of target journals where we would like to publish our work? And when does this process typically begin in the journey?
Okay. Very good question. I conduct this as a separate workshop, so I won't go into too much of details in here. So what I would suggest is there are some tips that you could look in for in order to understand these predatory journals and good journals. Okay, one is always consult with your guide, because your guide does have a number of years of experience in publishing research papers as well as being into the academics. So they have got that flair to understand about whether it's a good journal or not a good journal. That's the first and foremost thing. Second is there are different forums by which you could get access to the information. Let me quickly share something. I've got a lot of information that I keep up to everyone. You should be able to access it and get a lot of information in here. Is my screen shared? Can you see my screen?
No, sir, not at the moment.
Is it okay? Let me quickly reshare it.
By the time sir share the screen, Cherry, there is a course where we have research and publication ethics. This thing will be discussed in detail in that course as well. So by the time sir shares the screen.
Surely, thank you for updating.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Sir, it started to come up. Yeah, we can.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Now here there are a lot of information that I have in here. For example, the tips and tricks, guide to publishing research papers, models, referencing, how do you find the journal abstracting, something on the systematic literature review. Okay, so you can look in for the information by which you could come to know about the journals, where you should publish, where you should avoid. I have a lot of information given in here. Okay, how to pick the right journal, how to make use of this. So some common thing what I would talk about is whenever you want to publish something apart from the taking advice from the or working with your supervisor or the guide, always looking for the where these journals are being referenced. It should be either an ABDC listed or ABS. These are equivalent. ABDC is for the Australian Business Dean Council, whereas ABS is within the UK. So they are not exactly equivalent, but they have got different ratings associated with it. Similarly, looking for those which are Web of Science and Scopus indexed. Do not fall into the trap of where they are not indexed in any of these standard ones. And in order to, at the beginning of the career in academics specifically, you may not be able to differentiate and distinguish between good and not good. So I would strongly recommend work with your peers, look for the information in consultation with your guide.
Thank you.
And there are many such forums. There are Bailey's list. There are such lists which are being available where you can easily look for those, because it's very, very domain specific. There could be some which would talk about all management put together in one journal. These are some things that you should be avoiding in for. There are specifics that you should be looking in for publishing your research.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I'm giving very brief answer, okay? Otherwise, it's a huge topic by itself in order to look for those predatory journals and how do we avoid them.
Rishin Gupta.
Okay. Hello, sir. Sir, my question is that when we write a thesis, we kind of feel a bit I mean, there's a different feeling when difference in when you're writing a paper and when you're writing a thesis. It appears that writing thesis is doesn't matter that much because not many people would read it, and that feeling is there. So, what do you think should be our approach?
Sorry, what is your question then?
Okay, sir. So my question is that when we write a paper,
I understood everything. You tell me what is your question? Yeah, I can hear you. I got the gist of all that you said. My only point is, what is your question? What is it you want to know?
So I just want to know your thoughts on this.
The difference between publishing a research paper which has got a larger reach versus a thesis, is it? Is that what your question is?
Yes, sir.
I think
Yes, sir. So
I think she's asking about that a lot of people read research paper, but thesis is being read by only few. So whether we should put more emphasis, similar emphasis as we have kept there in research paper in the thesis, or we should make it lightly. This is what I think she would like to ask.
Exactly, sir. Exactly, sir. That's what I want. So this is exactly what I wanted to ask.
Okay, good question. I got the gist of it, of what your point is. Now, typically, as a research scholar, whenever you're working on, see, your end goal is definitely to have a thesis and then defending your thesis. But during this approach, you need to have a research papers. How they are written are totally different. How a research paper is structured and written is totally different from thesis. But having said that, there are a lot of elaborations that we will do while we are writing the thesis. It's not just looking into the reach per se, because the thesis that you are currently writing in for has got a specific, I would say, an objective which should sail through for your doctorate as a completion or as a prerequisite for your doctorate. There are different modes by which a thesis can also be referred to. I'll be covering some of them as part of the tips again. ProQuest is a particular forum in which there are a lot of theses that you can have access to. From India perspective, it is Shodh Ganga, which is a repository of the thesis, and that will have a reach of its own. Now, having said that, the reach of a thesis cannot be compared with the reach of a research paper. A research paper has got a reach worldwide as well, because it is very well structured and it is in a precise writing compared to a thesis. Just imagine if you have to read through 20 pages versus 250 or 400 pages. There is a difference between the two, right? So it has got its own, advantages or drawbacks and disadvantages. thesis association. But your point is good and well taken. The reach cannot be compared and contrasted. Okay. I hope that answers. Yeah. Any other questions? I think we got few more hands raised.
Prashant, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, Professor. So thank you so much, Dr. Sankaran, for sharing your perspective. So firstly, I have one very short question is, you have shown the website where you have mentioned the detail. Can we access that website as well of yours?
Yeah. Everybody has got access to it, and I keep it updated regularly as well.
Okay.
I keep updating with a lot of information which are relevant for the research scholars. I will share it with Professor Pandey and Akash so they can circulate it to you.
Yeah, sure. And the second question is the continuation of like the research paper, research journals. I am a part-time PhD scholar, and there are few journals which is indexed in the ABDC and the ABS, where they ask for the article processing fee. The article processing fee is not so much, it's like $50 or $100, but those journals are indexed in the ABDC and the ABS. So do you prefer us at least at a initial stage to publish into those journals?
If you ask me personally, I would strongly discourage anybody who's going into with this APC charges. Do not fall under this trap. It's a different ball game or a different business model what they follow in. Today they might be in a C journal or they might be in Scopus, and they would their number of research papers that they would publish as part of this journal from 10, 20, it might get increased by 50, 100-fold, by which they will make millions of rupees and then simply go off. So do not fall under this trap unless it has got a green open access. Open access is something different. Format altogether, wherein if you have your theory to be known to a lot of people, for example, then you could go in for an open access wherein there is no subscription model and individuals can easily read through and download them, and you would have a higher citation. So there is a different perspective of why should we approach in for paying the processing charges. Otherwise, normally I would strongly discourage you to follow this route.
But Professor, don't you think like it's very surprising, like these journals are indexed in the C category for at least 5-6 years, and still it is present?
I fully agree with you, Prashant. If you refer to their business model and how they work and how they make money, it's eye-opener. And that's the reason, the graph that is shown in with one place in India wherein you find so many red dots and all. That's the reason I always say, please do not fall into this trap. And we Indians, we research scholars are the more likelihood to be falling under these traps. So please avoid them. And the business model is different. The modus operandi is different altogether.
Okay, Professor. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take one more question and then I'll continue with my slides. Last question.
Shalika, can you go with your question?
Yeah. Good morning, sir. Sir, my question is, when we do the literature review, what I mainly do is I write the keywords in the Google Scholar, then I get lots of pages in Google Scholar and lots of papers. So some are relevant, some are not. And when I download the papers, there are a list of papers in the downloaded folders. So if we are about to do a systematic literature review, and suppose I want to make a database about which papers are relevant for me and which are not, how much papers I found. So how to do that? Because at the end of the day, it becomes very difficult to find out the relevant papers from in the downloaded folders. There are lots of papers, and at the end of the day, it becomes very difficult to make a database and find out the relevant ones.
Okay, good question, Shalika. So you have asked it in two parts. The first one is about the search by itself, and second is in the SLR. The methodology would be different between the two because SLR comes with a different scope and objective. So that's why it's known as a systematic literature review, irrespective of the type of databases that you search in for. For example, the first and foremost thing about you need to understand is what is an SLR and what is the approach and what is the objective associated with it. So irrespective of whoever does it, I defined a clear methodology of how did I arrive at the particular number of papers which are part of my study or within the scope of my study, irrespective of whether I do it or whether you do it, or anybody else in the world does it, they should be able to arrive at the same numbers, including the rigor criteria and the qualifier that I've used in order to fine-tune or come to a result as part of the SPA. Having said that, I will not be covering all those as part of today, but I'll give some tips associated with how do you do an intelligent search. For example, when you're searching with a particular keyboard, you could, with a keyword, there are a lot of Boolean logics that you could use in order to ensure that you get the right results. It's not simply, typing some words and then getting some thousands and millions of results and then saying, how do I work on them? No, but you should use intelligence search using the Boolean logic. I'll be covering it in a while as part of the tips and tricks, Shalika. So if it doesn't answer your question, then please do feel free to raise it later on when I open up.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'll continue with my slides, and I'll open up again at the end after the tips and tricks for another round of question answers. So these tips and tricks are, though we have covered some of them, there will still be a lot of them which are not covered, which I put it in a particular slide, which I'll go through now. The key thing is, has anybody seen this picture? Which place in India is it from? Anybody familiar with the place? No? Okay. Anybody from Andhra or been to Andhra? This huge tortoise. Okay, it's a place known as Srikakulam. Okay, and this is the picture I took. Okay, so the reason of putting this tortoise here is you all are familiar with the story of tortoise and hare. So we have to make progress as we talk about this. PhD is a journey. Every day there has to be sustained process. It should not happen that one fine day we sit down and write the literature review. For a month we do nothing, and then we sit and do something on methodology or we do some analysis and all. That will never work on. You must have a consistent progress. Even whatever tiny progress that you make doesn't matter, but it has to be consistent on daily basis. How you do it, what you do it is based upon the individual, based upon the methodology that you use, based upon the kind of study that you are working on. For example, it could be like what you're attending today. Okay, this is something, a progress towards your PhD journey. It could be some webinars that you are joining, and it could be some research papers that you're reading. So any such small processes are very, very critical as part of your journey. Do not miss out on these. Okay. Having said that, I put together these 14 pointers so that these are some of the tips and tricks which would help the research scholar through the progress. I'll go through each one of them. The first and foremost thing is about making notes. One of the major drawbacks that we have seen as part of the research scholars is, it's not only for the research scholars, but we all as human beings, we forget to understand what we did. For example, if you ask me what I did 6 months ago or what I did a year ago, I will definitely not remember that. So during this research journey, each research scholar must have this habit of making notes. And it is again crucial for academic integrity. You can't simply say you have done all this, but you need to substantiate that as well on how you did this, what approaches did you use it for. So all that will come in only if you keep making notes. Okay, notes could be anything, literature review, some factors that you found, some relationship that you found, some statistical justification you found, something on the sampling that you found, something on the conceptual model that it could be anything, that you would be referring to. Please make notes of them and do not miss out on this. How you do that is up to you. I would give some tips with respect to how you could organize them as well. You could maintain a register and start making notes. You can make multiple registers as well. I have been doing it frankly. I do make notes during this journey so that I don't miss out on any of the critical perspectives. And again, anything that you read through has to be organized for. be it on the hard disk, be it on referencing, anything that you do should be organized first, so that if you want to go back and refer to them, it should not be something that you spend too much amount of time in it. If I look into the literature, and this is where somebody had asked the question for, okay, not this. Give me one sec. Okay, I'll come back to this in a moment. Okay. Somebody asked for the literature one. I'll quickly go through about how do you find the literatures, how do you use this intelligent search, and then the different methods and tools that could be used for as part of the progress. Again, for everything you need to have a rational. Only when you make notes you will be able to understand. For example, if in some research paper somebody has used I'll give a very simple example: convenience sampling using the survey method. So, as a scholar, you need to understand why have you used convenience sampling? What kind of population is it? Whether it is finite, infinite, and within this population, what kind of approach have they used in for? So all these comes in as a justification. You must make use of this when you read through the paper. That can only happen when you are able to organize your material as well as you can make notes. Again, when you compare and contrast, you need to have a rationale associated with it. When you have your hypothesis defined, when you have your results, you draw the inference of the results and then saying that, was it similar or dissimilar? Your hypothesis is supported, not supported. Which ones were similar, dissimilar? How would you make all those again? For that, you need to ensure that you keep making notes associated with this. Okay. Now, this is what I was talking about, the intelligent search. There are various databases which exist for that you could make use of as part of your study. You might be familiar with all these Web of Science and Scopus. So whichever that your university have got access to, you could make use of them. For example, EBSCO, ProQuest, Emerald, Sage, Science Direct is from elsewhere, Taylor and Francis and Wiley. So different databases does exist by which you can make use of them. Google Scholar is actually not a database. And if you personally ask me, I will never recommend making use of Google Scholar as part of your literature search to be cited in, or for your SLR, or for your meta-analysis. Google Scholar is, because you could find anything, I can just create my own and then upload into the Google Scholar, which should be searchable for. So I would not recommend making, you can always refer to the Google Scholar just for searching something, but not as part of your thesis or as part of your SLR study or part of your research papers. You can use them, but not cite them. And my recommendation is totally different, because you need to ensure that it is of quality, what work you are doing, as well as it has got the rigor. Otherwise, it will be missing on the Google Scholar. Okay? Then when you're searching for it, I've taken one example as mobile payment. Everybody's familiar with these digital payments and mobile payments, right? So if I want to make use of this, if I simply type in as mobile payment on, say, Google Scholar, it will return me millions of results. But what is the scope of my study? I need to make use of different logic associated with it. That's what I'd call about the Boolean logic or intelligent search. As a scholar, you should be able to understand what is the scope and objective of my study and what is it I'm interested in. For example, if I'm interested only in these two models, UTAUT and UTAUT2, then I could make use of an AND. I'll give a quick demonstration as well about what each of them means. You also should know about what these double quotes are. See, there are the logic, what the results are being returned might be totally different with Google Scholar compared to the Scopus or the Web of Science, or for example, even the Science Direct, because it's all about the way that the publishers have built the logic in order to search for. So you need to use the right criteria so that you get meaningful results and not you get bogged down into thousands of research papers that you have to download each one of them, open up them, and then discard them saying this is within the scope of my study or not within the scope of my study. So you can combine them by making use of these double quotes. You can use and the and the brackets in order to fine-tune your search criteria. I'll briefly explain about this as well. And the next thing is, whenever you're doing the literature search, you should use the concept of go forward and go backward. So when you're reading a particular research paper, looking for all the, the bibliographic section or the references section, which all papers have they cited for. So look for those information. That's what is go backward. And go forward is which all newer papers have cited those papers. So you must make use of both this logic, apart from searching from the databases, in order to finalize or fine-tune whether you're doing it as part of a literature review or for an SLR, for example. And I hope everybody understands what a Venn diagram is. We all have done as part of our schooling, and that's what is typically in order to explain about the Boolean logic. If you want to make use of these two phrases, mobile payments, to search for the results, one method is using OR. That means wherever there is mobile or payments, it will return all these results. The second approach is using an AND. So the shaded one is what it means. That means it should contain both mobile and payments. Now, as I said, the logic what it uses in order to search for them would typically depend on the publishers and the search condition. So if you want to make sure that it is exactly in the phrase what it should be, that means mobile followed by payments, not payments followed by mobile. In that case, you need to use double quotes. Okay, and then if it is something like a not, that means mobile, not payments, you could make use of this again. So so the shaded one, what we see here is only mobile, not payments. So you can fine tune accordingly by making use of this and, or, and, not. So that's the logic to be used. Okay. So that's what I have covered in here is about this, this first part with respect to this, and then you can combine them together in order to make use. Okay. So that's about the search. The second is about the methods and tools used. There are different approaches what you could use it for. So say what best is for you. So one typical example is I talked about making notes and how do you do it. So this is the approach I have used in for different, you call them methods or the tools used in for. For example, I've taken this as an example from the structural equation modeling that I've used. The first step is, now are you all able to hear me? I'm getting a message that my internet is unstable. I hope you're able to hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So I've taken this example from SEM, which is a structured equation modeling. Now, how do I go about with this? Again, I will go back to the step that I mentioned is we normally tend to forget. These are something that we will not be working day in and day out, but think from the point of view when you are doing the analysis using SPSS, MOS, or Smart PLS, and at the end of the time, say when it comes to the difference, you should be able to demonstrate about each of these tools that you have used. You should be knowledgeable about what you have done, how you have done it. So you could make use of something with a register as a step-by-step. You identify the steps that you have used and for. So this is the way that I have done it. I'm just giving a picture from my register. So this is step number 7 for the measurement model. I have even identified, this is from typically SPSS, okay? So when we do what kind of results we get, how do I go about it? So that tomorrow if I want to come back and refer to what I did. Now, why is it required is, for example, whenever you want to publish your research paper, it's again an iterative process. There could be some fine tuning required. You might need to redo certain steps or it could be at the later point in time, based upon the results, you might need to go back and revisit them. In that case, you might tend to forget those steps. So you have, this is the, as I said, this is the approach I use for. I even identified which particular checkbox did I click and why, and what kind of results did I get. So that is one way of writing a step-by-step process as part of your register. So that I don't forget, I can easily come back and refer to. And since I've done multiple studies, some which are common across, for example, my study 2 was on mobile banking with the moderator. Study 3 was with mediator, multi-mediation model. Study 4 was with the brand equity, again, multi-mediation. So the use of moderation will be different than mediation, but there are still some commonality across that I would like to do it. far. So I might need to look in for the steps again when I want to work on this. So this is step by step. Second is using a block diagram approach. Means you identify, for example, drill down, for example, in model fitness, what do you get? What kind of validity concerns could exist and how do you do that? In case of measurement invariance, why is it required and how would you do that? So that could be in a block diagram. And the next is in the tabular form. I'll just show in about how the tabular form is. And then I also had everything on the output that I get as part of the results in an Excel file. So whether you use one or two or all the approaches, it's typically left up to a research scholar on work that you're doing. I have used all of them, so I'm sharing my approach here. So this is the tabular form. So this I created actually. So which starts with, you need to have a step-by-step approach whenever you're working on, say, the data after the data collection, right from the time when you have done the data collection till you get all your results. So how do you look in for? So there are some prerequisites. How do you make sure that your data is clean? So there are some steps to be done. And then how would you do that? For example, for the unengaged response, I used I calculated standard deviation using X. And if the standard deviation is equal to 1, that so what kind of action do I need to take? If it is 0, or what value should it be? What kind of action do I need to take? So I have defined in the last column about my inferences associated with it, or what values did I get, or what should be the nominal values or suggestible values. So you can identify what approach works best for you. This is for the data screening, right from missing data, unengaged, or outliers, or how do we make sure that the multivariate statistical assumptions are met before we go ahead with the process. Then what comes for the EFA and CFA, and then the structural model. Again, this also will typically, some steps will be typically dependent on what we want to do. For example, if I'm doing mediation analysis, then what should it be? If I'm using moderators, I use multi-group comparison. Or even for the prerequisites to be met, what should I look in for? So all this needs to be looked in from this perspective. And I can also have in a tabular form with respect to what measures and what are the different thresholds and who has recommended that. Again, you have to give all these inferences whenever you get some results. You need to justify for these values and what you get. So this is something that you can keep documenting as part of it. Okay, that's the first step. Second is the questions. There are various phases as we looked into, we might get stuck. So don't be afraid to ask, why are we doing this, or how do we do this? For example, if you want to understand the prerequisites, ask questions about how do we do this, or why do we need to do this? For example, if I tell you do a multivariate, for the multivariate, there are some prerequisites to be met. So if you ask for how should I do it, or why is it required to be done? If you got a Likert scale, is it actually required or not required to be done? So look in from those perspectives as a rational as well. It's not just to question, but to understand about the methodology behind it, and to provide a rational, because you need to be intelligent enough at the time of defending your thesis. There could be any questions asked from anywhere, and you should be in a position to defend your thesis as well. So make sure that you understand the rationale behind it and anticipate. So that means while you're working on any phase, like somebody asked today with respect to, I'm getting so many number of research papers which I need to download. How do I organize them? How do I make use of them? So anticipate the kind of problems that can occur, and how do we overcome those as well? So be a good communicator, identify your own strengths and weaknesses, as well as it's not just trying to collate information, but you need to have the literacy with respect to the information. You should be intelligent enough to understand about what is that I need, what is that I don't need, how do I don't use those which are not relevant for my studies and prevent making use of them. Third is very, very critical. As a scholar, never use any excuse culture. Do not get into this trap of saying it is his fault or her fault and not mine. You would have heard this proverb as well. Failure has many fathers and success has none. So do not fall under this trap. Don't blame anybody for anything. Specifically, don't catalog the mistakes. But there are number of things, as a research scholars that we all have to go through across and meet with those deadlines. So do not blame your guide or anybody else with respect to what you have not been able to do, why you have not been able to do, be it from your family, be it your peers, be it anybody, okay? Do not blame anyone for anything. If you do not understand, ask questions, identify the methods by which you should be able to overcome them. For example, take additional training, join for such webinars and conferences, look for the different online courses by which you can upskill yourself. Make sure that do not use anything with respect to having an exchange. Is again very critical to do the work for you. It is, as I mentioned it before, it is your study, it is your research, it is your baby. Make sure that you nurture it. Do not expect anyone else to do it for you. And what we normally say is look yourself at the mirror. So identify whether your work is of high quality or not. Be self-motivated and committed to the work, and develop this approach of working independently. You must ask questions. You must go in for seeking the information. I would rather say seeking the right information, but eventually to work independently. Develop this habit. And the fourth point is learn new skills. Now, which skills? Again, it should be within the framework of what you need as part of your study. If you're doing the structural equation modeling, you must have a knowledge of what is SPSS MOS, when do you use them, when do you use PLSM or the smart PLS, when should you use ADANCO, when you should not use them, which is perfectly fine. But it should not be that you need to know everything about every such tool which exists. So identify the right tool that will be useful for your study. Okay, I would always emphasize on this, right? Strive for correct knowledge. Today, typically, the world is the resource. You've got so many information on YouTube's workshops and all. I would say can impart you the right knowledge. Simply because I would strongly recommend you all that you should be in a position to identify who gives you the right knowledge and who does not. So always try for getting the right knowledge. Keep adding to your knowledge base. How do you do that? Based upon the literature review. Look for literatures from very good journals, very good authors. Look for seminal papers. Read through them on regular basis. Look for the kind of updates which is happening today. The world is changing, and the world is changing with a fast pace, with the kind of digitization that is going through. So make sure that you keep updating your knowledge as well. Be it in the conference, different FDPs, workshops, YouTubes, websites. Look for information and the right information. Develop your skills. Break down into step-by-step approach. For example, you can say, if I want to learn how to work with SPSS MOS, it's a huge tool. My objective is only to use structural equation modeling. So which one should I use? Why should I use them? So break it down into the steps. For example, the first I learn about data cleaning perspective, and then I look in for some prerequisites, and then look in for some, factor analysis. How do I do that? If there is a discriminant validity issue, how should I solve them before I get into the structural model? So looking for those which would help you to understand by breaking them down into steps, and look for the right knowledge. Practice them. The test is again very critical because you have to understand during the journey whether your sample size is adequate, whether you are in the right approach, whether your questionnaire is correct, whether it could be understood, whether you will get all the validity and reliability measures. So do a pilot study in order to gauge the responses. If it is qualitative, again, in qualitative also we do the pilot study by interviewing few candidates in order to understand whether my questions that I'm using as part of my structured or unstructured interviews, are they correct? Do I get into the kind of information that I'm seeking as part of this? So you must do a pilot study in order to test, be it your conceptual model or be it your approach or your methodology or the samples that you have in place. do not, otherwise you will fall into the trap that at the end of the year, then you will think that, oh, I've collected the data, I'm not getting results, what should I do? So please avoid that. Do a test study in order to make sure that you are able to, get meaningful results and you get a validation that you are approaching in the right direction. Step number 5 is remember that world is your resource. So do not be, narrow focused. There are a lot of resources which are available, but the word of caution is, again, look for authentic resources. Simply, I would avoid making use of the Google Scholars, or nowadays there are so much information available in the YouTube. Everybody can simply, record and put it across in the YouTube. They can have their own channels. Everything is free of cost. But as a research scholar, you are the recipient for it. You are being bombarded with all this information. You need to be in a position to understand whether that resource is correct, authentic, whether it is useful for me or not. So please do not fall into the trap of simply looking and spending your time and efforts into a wrong direction. And always look for reputed resources as well as international sources. So what international sources mean? There are a lot of these FDPs, webinars and all which are being conducted. Be part of them. Even the journals, editors also conduct these seminars and webinars and the workshops. Be part of them so that you could not only hear from Indians, but also from reputed international sources as well. I would always emphasize on GIGO. I hope you all understand what it is. Those who are from IT field, they are familiar with this, the garbage in and garbage out. It is very, very critical to understand what is the type of inputs that you get, since we are bombarded with so much of information. If you get the wrong information, in that case, it will lead to unlearning easy. Still easy, but to unlearn and then learn is much more difficulty what it brings into. So please avoid getting into the trap of wrong resources. Okay, so typically this is what is GIGO for. So if you put a garbage in, a computer will still process all this information and give you some output. Output is never going to be useful for. So do not fall into this. Always look for quality information. Even if you're doing a literature review, look for from authentic sources. Look for information from, like I said, ABDC and ABS journals whenever you're doing a literature review on. That gives about the kind of depth and the width of the knowledge a research scholar has gone through. Okay? The 6th point is again very critical from the point of view of the plan and timeline. Whenever you are planning it for, since we talk this as a journey, you must keep the end goal in mind. So what is the end goal? And how do you prepare for this? What kind of milestones would exist for? This is something, a snapshot from my plan. You can use something similar, or based upon how you plan for, you can make use of this. So the end goal for mine was, what is the kind of success that I looked for? I should finish my PhD within 3 years and pass without correction. I hope you understand what means pass without correction. I'll give you a snapshot of this as well. So this was my goal when I joined in. Then I identified the different milestone. I put it in a simple Excel file saying, okay, I joined in the month of July 18 when I joined IIM-Ranchi. We have different terms. So I've given it as year 1, year 2, year 3, broken down into months and said, okay, for each term, when these terms will be conducted, what kind of courses or subjects will be covered as part of it. And then some timelines with respect to the dates when these will be covered and what are the different milestones. Okay, then I said, okay, what should be the milestones are? I need to clear each of the term. Okay, so you have to break it down for every milestone to be achieved for this PhD term. And then I said, okay, these are the milestones, and then what would be my plan? So I started my literature review right in the beginning. I even started initial phase itself. I faced multiple bottlenecks with respect to understanding about how do I go about. For example, a very simple thing is, if I get duplicates, how do I remove the duplicates? I got stuck even at this place as well. So as a scholar, since we do not have experience with respect to working on it, there could be multiple bottlenecks that we would go through. So identify your plan. This last column was my plan to indicate about what I should be doing as part of. Okay, so create your own plan. So you must have a plan for this PhD journey. And this is what it typically means in with respect to what I talked about without any change. Whenever the thesis is sent for external examination, it comes in with a report. Okay, the report which will be detailed as well as these categories. The category which talks about accepted without change or with minor change or revise and resubmit to the thesis advisor. In case it is unacceptable, that means you do not get your PhD. You do not go through your defense by itself. So there are various stages that it goes through based upon how the examiner has evaluated your thesis. So you can define what is your end goal in mind and then work towards it about how do you achieve them. So the key thing is what Benjamin Franklin has defined for is, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. So always keep this in mind, plan in advance. And it's not just for the time, but keeping the goal in mind. What do you want to achieve? Like I showed you in the last slide, break it down into multiple steps, multiple months, and for each of the month, what is it you want to achieve and for? Again, the next is, there are a lot of the scholars who are present here who might be onto the, executive PhD as well. So, and even for those who are regular, you need to allocate at least 30 minutes of productive time each day. It should be uninterrupted. That means no interruptions of digital in any form, be it on the social network like LinkedIn, Facebooks, or sending and receiving mails or mobile phones and all. You must have a total digital silence, let me put it this way, and then work towards with this focused approach of whatever that you do, whether you do literature review, you do your analysis. So work towards in such a way that you have got this consistency. This also works. For example, you print out the plan that you have in place and put it in a prominent place so that you could, whatever plan that you have written, it's not simply lying in a place, but it's right in front of you. You can visualize the plan. So put it in a place like at your desk or paste it on a mirror wherein you can see it every day so that these affirmations would act as a catalyst and it can manifest towards your goal to reach the PhD. Okay. The other points are, choose your optimum productive time. Again, it is based on individual nature. For example, some would start quite early in the morning at 4 or 5 in the morning. Some would like to sleep at that time. Some would be more productive during the night time. So based upon how your individual characteristics are planned, this time can be either in the morning or late night based upon how you feel it comfortable with, and develop project management skills. So risk management, I think you understand about what this means. At various stages, you could have different hurdles, and how do you overcome them? If this fails, what should you be doing? And if results do not, what should be the next plan in place? So look for those options. Okay, I think I should be much quicker. Okay, then comes in for being connected, wherein there are a lot of tools that scholars could use in for. I will cover it at the last part of this, and then be connected. So what this means is the different tools that could be used in as a research scholar, which you should be aware of, and how do you use them. So it's not just personal or interpersonal skills, but also the knowledge and the tools that you need to use to be part of this academic community. I will be covering this in a while. Okay, then look for the alternate ways. What typically this means is, say if you have used SPS as a MOS, the question could be asked, why have you not used to use the concepts, theories, models, results, tools, everything you must have analyzed and for. If you've used a particular conceptual model or you have derived from a particular conceptual model, you need to understand about what are the alternate models available. You need to compare and contrast and come up with a rationale of why have you used a specific model, how relevant is it in your study and in the context of your study. So be familiar with all the alternate ways that you would. Then comes about the referencing. There are specific referencing styles to be used in for both in case of your thesis as well as in research papers. Predominantly, we use APA referencing style. you must be familiar about what this is and why do we use them, and use the latest as well as the relevant references. So that means till the time you submit your thesis, you need to make sure that you are able to use them and use it correctly. I'll give a quick demo on what it is, and then you should be able to use the reference management software so that you don't spend too much of manual efforts in sorting out these references and identifying which references to use and which should not be used. Make use of a reference management software like Mendeley. I'm giving a very brief demo on this as an APA style. So if you have any of the references to be used in for, so what it shows is the first is the authors, followed by the year, followed by the name of the research paper or the title, followed by the journal as Marketing Intelligence and Planning, followed by the issue number, volume number, followed by issue number and the page number and the DOI. This is the format that should be used for. So when you're using a reference management software, it does all this formatting for you. For example, the way that you use the last name followed by the first name, whether it should be on the first letter to be used it for, and within in-text and end-text citations, how should it be used for? So be very familiar about this. And all these are from the APA 7th edition. You must also make use of or read through this manual in order to understand about how research papers should be used, how web pages should be used, how should you organize your thesis, the tables, the figures, where the title should be. So everything will help you if you have got a clear understanding about these. Again, some, these citations are definitely something which is normally assumed in for the research scholar should know for. So my strong recommendation would be please go through this APA manual. Okay, and similarly, whenever you want to use the citations, in-text citations, both parenthetical as well as narrative citations, how should you use them? I've got all this as part of my website as well, so you can always make use of the information from my website. I've just given it for reference here. Which here the point I'm emphasizing is, as a research scholar, you must know how you should be using it. For example, if it is a parenthetical citation, you must do something like with an ampersand. If you are using a narrative one, the brackets goes off and ampersand should be replaced with and the only year comes in the double quote. So based upon the place where you are using in the sentence, as well as your writing style, that differs whether you should use parenthetical or a narrative citation. And if you're using single author, multiple author, more than 2 authors, how should it be? And then at the end of the text reference. So please be aware about this and make use of this. The next point is about research papers. So make sure that you have got any research papers that you produce as part of your thesis during the journey or after the journey. It should be of publishable standard. That means it should be in a good research journal, which are for part of either say ABDC or in ABS, and there are different norms as well that we go through. The UGC listed journal, it should be part of the Web of Science or the Scopus list. Now, as an academician, as a research scholar, we all get into this publish or perish. So what does it mean? Why do we need to use it for? I'll quickly browse through this information as well. And then how do you get all this information, for example, when they are published? And you can set alerts. Most of the sites gives you this option of identifying your keywords. Based upon the keywords, you can set an alert. So whenever a new paper is published, you will get an alert. And that becomes very handy. Rather than you searching for the information, you get this information in your mailbox. And then whenever you are creating your research paper, always create a checklist for your own before you submit to a particular journal about the different prerequisites, whether you have met or not. I'll give a very simple example. The abstract that we use in for Emerald Journal is a structured abstract, whereas elsewhere it will be an unstructured abstract. If you send the structured abstract to a journal which is in elsewhere, its likelihood of getting rejected because you have not followed the norms of those. So before you send in, create your own submission checklist, which lists down about the kind of criteria, what you need to be using before you submit to a particular journal. always refer to the guide for authors. Guide for author gives in lots of information related to, for example, the manuscript to be used in for, what the word count is, how the referencing style should be used in for. And if you're using a reference management software, it becomes much easier. They'll give you a kind of link by which you can directly download the style for your reference management software. So look in for all this information, read through this and create your own checklist. Now, why should you be publishing a research paper? There are many such reasons for it. For example, I want to share my learning and disseminate the knowledge, or it could be for sourcing some of the funding, or you want to build your reputation as an academician. It could be influencing the policies, or it looks good on my CV, or it is something as a prerequisite as part of my PhD journey that I need to publish in for, or I'm looking in for advancements in my career as a faculty. Hence, I need to publish it. So there could be various reasons. So be familiar with about why you need to publish and continue with this journey. I'll come into a couple of these points which are related with your thesis writing as well as your final defense. So in the thesis writing, I think this was one of the questions which was asked in with respect to structuring of. Now, again, your structuring of the thesis should start from the quite initial phases. Do not wait for the completion of your data analysis and then say, I will start writing my thesis. No, please do not do that. There could be multiple revisions that you can always have as part of it. So understand the structure of the thesis that you need to submit as part of your university. Work accordingly from the quite initial phase is what I would recommend for. What this structure is, I'll just cover in the next slide, and narrow the scope. So what typically this means is, during the PhD journey, you will go through multiple things. Do you want to show everything to the examiner? No. So be very choosy, very specific about what content you put as part of your thesis as well. I'll give you an example. For example, as part of my study, I did use the artificial neural network for a predictive modeling of the mobile banking, but I did not use it as part of my. So there are some specifics that you might be working on. You might be enthusiastic to learn, to upgrade your skills, but identify what should be the scope of and the objectives of your thesis. What is it you want to meet? How do you sail through it easily? Do not simply put together a lot of those information because you know something or you have done something. To tell you frankly, I do have this research paper, which is the ANN that I talked about, which is under review in the A category journal, but it is not part of my thesis, which is perfectly fine. And whenever you're reading through others' thesis, specifically for your seniors, do not follow them mechanically. So if they have made some mistake, you'll simply be copying that mistake. So read through them, ensure that you use the correct information. Now, this is how you would structure the thesis. These are standards, okay? This is something which is predominantly used if it is a single study. The kind changes it could bring in is based upon if you're using a multi-study. Otherwise, predominantly, this is something that you would be using it for. Again, the approach would change. If you're using, say, only qualitative study, in that case, you won't have a conceptual model. If you're using propositions, you would not have hypothesis. So accordingly, there could be some subtle changes in it, but predominantly, this is how the theses are structured. You'll have a title page, declaration, acknowledgement, abstract, the table of contents, figures, tables, appendices, abbreviations used. Then comes in the introduction part, the first chapter. The second chapter would be the literature review. The third chapter would be the conceptual model and the hypothesis development. Fourth would be your research methodology. Now I'm going into very brief, okay, just giving you the title, but each one of them have got a lot of considerations that I have gone through now. For example, how do you develop the conceptual model? How do you combine multiple models? How do you make sure that they are very relevant from the study? It should be mapped with your objectives, your research gap, and then you develop your conceptual model. How do you define a hypothesis? Okay, so there are a lot of considerations under each of them as well. The data analysis, then results discussion, then comes the conclusion and recommendation. Now, typically, what I've also heard from a lot of them is you would have done a wonderful job for incorporating good methodology and doing a lot of analysis and all. But when it comes into the conclusion and recommendation, you might be exhausted. So make sure that you give due emphasis to the last chapter as well, wherein you define the theoretical contribution as well as the managerial questions associated with your study. What kind of limitations does it bring into, and what are the directions? Then bibliography and the appendix. This is how the structure of a PhD thesis typically. And always refer to the PhD manual. Okay, this your university's PhD manual will again talk about this. So get this information from the very beginning of your journey. Then into the defense. Anybody going through the final defense? Should I go through this or should I not go through this based upon the time? Any recommendation? Shall I go through this?
You may leave it right now.
Final defense. What are the guidelines?
You may leave it right now.
Okay. So I've got a lot of pointers as well. So since you have the recording, you can always go through this. How do we prepare for the Viva? Some guidelines related with, what are the do's and don'ts associated with the final Viva preparation. And then the key important part is about the backups. Make sure that you take a backup on regular basis. How much should you do? How often? The frequency associated with it, typically based upon your progress. If you have done some substantial work, you must always take a backup immediately. And nowadays, you can have a USB drive, an external USB drive, and plug it in your computer. It's not too costly, because if you lose any of your data or your work, it will have much more higher repercussions associated with it. So take a backup on regular basis. I believe with this thought that great PhDs are created through focus, persistence, and endurance. Focus throughout, again, be systematic, use the approach by which you should be able to get to this. Okay, this is one last point I had about the different tools for a scholar. I think I won't go through each one of them, but very, very briefly, there are various things that we should be familiar with. For example, I talked about thesis and dissertation, which you should have in Shodh Ganga as well as the ProQuest. You should know what the should you avoid getting into the plagiarism should be part of, and again, what should you be looking in for? Similarly, the different search engines, and if you want to identify which journal you want to publish in, so it's massive. If you look into the popular publishers by itself, has got more than 12,000 journals. Finding the right journal is again a critical task for a research scholar. It's not only doing your work, but also making sure that you identify the right journal by putting moving on from one to the other. How do you pick for them? There are a lot of these tools. Again, it's there in my website. You should make use of it. What plagiarism is and some of the tips to avoid plagiarisms, I've defined them. And I think that covers all these 14 points that I had in plan for as tips and tricks for the research scholars. And make sure that, we did talk about the journey of the PhD. As a research scholar, the key thing is we normally talk about the work and life balance, but as a scholar, you must be able, you must celebrate. If you have published your research paper, you must celebrate. You have presented a proposal and it is accepted, you must celebrate. You have got the results, you must celebrate. So there has to be a balance between the work, the research, as well as the life. So I've added this word as the research, apart from the work-life balance. Make sure that you enjoy your journey, not looking for getting bogged down and being lost into the maze. And that would help you to bring up with a good motivation associated. It's a very good video in order to understand about the knowledge. So maybe I'll share this across with you. It's still of a few minutes, at least 2-3 minutes, which talks about the contribution to the knowledge. you can watch it at your leisure. It's very eye-opening, as well as what they strive for the right knowledge and whether it is available or not. And at the end of it, you will actually get tears in your eyes by watching this video. Very, very subtle to understand about the knowledge what exists and what people, how do they thrive for the knowledge.
A lot of senior those who are our PhD scholar like Sujay Ranjan Chaudhary ji, who's a brigadier person, he is handling the entire thing. He has written a great comment even that this is what under the one roof everything is being served here. So it's a wonderful thought process, wonderful lecture, and it was a great learning for all of us. There are still few questions. If you feel free, then Akash, why don't you take few questions? Like I can remember the last question, Professor Manjushri Palit, she asked, what is your opinion about publishing our thesis as a book form, specifically in social sciences and other areas of domain? So
there are opportunities existing actually on the thesis. It all go by the quality of work that you have done, and if there are any substantial work that you have done as part of your thesis, then definitely yes, there are opportunities existing for branching it out as a book or as research papers. I'll give some examples to tell you frankly. I hope all of you are familiar with TAM as a model, the technology acceptance model. In 1988, this was a part of the thesis of Davis. So there are studies which are done, which actually has got this kind of scope of getting into, I have his thesis as well, which talks about the originality of the work of the TAM development model as part of his research. So there are scope existing in order to publish this. It all goes with the kind of quality work that you have done as part of your study. Avenues are existing, to tell you frankly, to be converted into the books or to be converted into multiple, not just one, but multiple research papers as well. We can definitely explore them.
Any other question which you would like to take, Akash?
So I think Latika had a question. Latika, if you want to ask a question.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Akash. And thank you, sir, for an absolutely brilliant, exhaustive presentation. It was really, it really opened our eyes to probably what to expect going forward. You had mentioned in your conversation, sir, about these professional groups or collaborations which one can kind of dip into to expand our understanding of our domain. I wanted to ask you, are there any kind of platforms or any kind of, places where one can go and identify such, So the work that I am doing is slightly new in this space, and even at an international and a global level. So I am, either it is paid for, but as at a professional level, are there places where one can go and identify these kind of academic interest groups that are formed? Thank you.
I understand the question correctly. It is about the groups formation for the academics, right?
Yes, sir. And more relevant also to the domain.
Okay. Now, which ones these are is something has to be explored for, because it is domain specific and based upon your interest as well. But there are some very common ones. For example, there are some groups created in ResearchGate, some in academia, some in LinkedIn, some in Facebook. There are multiple such forums existing. And similarly, out of this also, based upon what you come across as part of the webinars, FDPs, you can form certain groups as well. There are different associations also which you can make use of in order to form these groups. There are no specific guidelines or specific rules associated with this, because it will purely depend upon your interest area and what you want to perceive or foresee on. But there are the avenues which are existing, definitely. You can get involved into these.
Sure, sir. Thank you.
So, sir, I have a question. Like, I want to understand. You had 4 different studies as a part of your thesis.
Correct.
So, like, were you planning to do 4 studies initially, or was that derived from your research, and like how you came across this idea of 4 studies, and how did you manage all this together?
Yeah, good question. You asked multiple questions here. So, frankly, I never had an idea of, if you ask from the very beginning, I never had an idea of 4 studies. Okay. During the process of getting an enrollment, you have to present something. So I gave a conceptual model with respect to how I would progress on it. It was a single approach, single model. Okay. And I was not so rich with respect to my knowledge on the domain of research as well, but I presented something which I thought of doing one. But when I went through the studies, I developed through it, then I realized over a period of time, frankly, I had some end goal in mind. Even before my terms started, I went through the tools. Like I went through a training on SPSS and MOS before I went into my term classes as well. As soon as I joined in, I went in for this. I had some end goal in mind in order to understand how should I be achieving for it. But coming back to your question on, definitely I did not have a mind that I will do 4 studies, but eventually I ended up with 4. I started with 1 before I joined in. Then in order to understand about the rational, see, for example, I can make modifications to the model and then say, okay, this is what I have done as part of the quantitative. Will that be acceptable? So that was the question. And from the consumer behavioral studies that you could do, and from the Indian context, to understand the consumer's perspective. For example, I had about mobile payments, but it changed over a period of time. As I said, I did land up with 4 studies. Then the next question comes in about any studies that we do as part of our thesis, it has to be connected together. My first study should be connected to the second, to the third, to the fourth. It can't be done quite independently. The approaches and the results I got from the first study actually branched out into the second and the third study and the fourth study. So that's how I have identified for. For example, in the second study I did with the moderator in order to understand whether the characteristics remain similar across the groups or not. See, one method is to simply say hypothesis supported, not supported. Within the supported ones, whether the characteristics remain the same across the groups or not is where we use moderation. In the third one, I extended further in order to understand about the satisfaction and loyalty. Was I think you all will be aware, and you will be supporting me as well. Paytm had a first mover advantage in India. If we talk about Paytm Karo, very synonymous to photocopy, Xerox, if I put it for the photocopy. But then Pay came in. Being identified as part of my first study, so I had to do something on the brand equity in order to understand the popularity of the consumers, first mover advantage which had in India. So multiple things could branch up subsequently, and hence I went in for this. Yeah.
So,
any other questions?
Lavanya asks a question that do IIM and IITs have a different repository of thesis? Because on Shodh Ganga, she is not able to find out the thesis published by or completed by IIM and IIT scholars.
Okay, good point. I think this is an initiative taken with respect to the Shodh Ganga. I don't think every IIT and IIM are part of it. There are some which are and some which are not. It's purely based upon the individual university, if I may put it that way, because though each IITs and IIMs are part of the Ministry of, are governed by the Ministry of HRD, but still they are separate entities. They take certain decisions. There are not only IITs and IIM, but every such university, everybody is not part of that Shodh Ganga as a centralized repository. I think it'll still take some more years in order to have that kind of knowledge base. It's a very good initiative actually to put together so that scholars across the world or across the country can have access to it and can download them. I think it'll take some more years to get all those information. But you can always visit the library of each of these universities. But again, it's a mammoth task. If you want to go through every library and get access to the printed copy of the thesis in order to scan through and read that. But there are alternatives available for which you can approach. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, Pavas asked a question that how do you see the industry academia divide in the Indian context? And how much do you encourage industry practitioners to take the traditional academic research part in order to develop less industry academia challenges that you're asking about?
Yeah, I think it comes in multiple frames. For example, the kind of research that you do in for, some are done purely from the academics point of view. I'll give certain examples. Say when you do the theoretical model and how do you create theories, how do you create models? There are more theoretical in base. But eventually when it has to go in for testing of these models, then you definitely need to have that kind of approach by which it can be tested live. Similarly, there are a lot of studies which are done from the industry perspective, which has got very relevance to the industry as well. But if we talk about the divide between industry and academia, there are still a lot of these gaps which does exist. And I would, for example, in industry, if I take a very simple example, Six Sigma, you might be doing a lot of projects as part of your industry, be it into the product or service part. And the kind of results which are being produced are very, very relevant. But unfortunately, whatever is being done in the industry remains in the industry. It doesn't come out into a centralized form wherein it can be shared across the board. There could be various reasons associated with it. For example, if I talk from my experience, I've done 3 Six Sigma projects, each leading to around $250K US of savings. There are certain, customer intricacies, organizational challenges, which cannot be brought across into the open. Hence, all this information does not get disseminated across. Whereas in academia, whatever you do a research on, you publish them, which information gets disseminated. So definitely there is the divide does exist but we do work in order to ensure that there are some best practices which could be adopted, used, or the research that you perform could be based on some industry. But yeah, good question, but it's not a very easy and simple answer to say that. The divide does exist, and the approach is to minimize some of these divides.
So there is another question from Ruth Sarah Philip. What is your opinion on subscribing to journals? Is it going to make much difference, or will just going through the abstracts and open access articles do in guiding us to write down on our own papers?
Okay, very good question. Frankly, I also had a lot of these inhibitions, if I may put it this way, inhibitions in mind when I started my job. But the opportunity I got is that within IIM, we have got subscriptions to most of these. So I never had this kind of stumbling block with respect to getting into the research papers. Frankly speaking, if you refer only to the abstract and open access articles, you are limiting your scope. You must broaden your scope by reading through the articles. Now, these articles, which are published in various various journals, they come in 2 different forms. If I don't talk, on the open access, it comes in 2 different forms. One is a subscription based, and second is pay per research paper or paper use kind of thing. So most of the having said that, if I'm an individual and if I want to buy a particular research paper for using as part of my research or my thesis, for example, as an Indian, I'm talking about, each of these papers would cost something around $30 to $40. Individually, I will not prefer to do that, and I will not be able to afford to do that if I have to refer to a number of papers that I want to study in for. So the approach of subscription-based model is excellent, and it's an excellent resource for the research scholars. Having said that, every university in India do not have that subscription mode, which becomes a bottleneck. So whenever you're doing your literature review, surveys, anything that you work on, you must base your theory, you must base your research paper by citing good research papers, and it doesn't come free. Okay, I hope that answers your question.
I think, sir, we don't have any more questions, but the scholars are praising the session, and a few of them are really grateful to the session that you have given us, and they would like to re-listen this recording again. So would it be possible for you, or you allow us to share it on a public platform like YouTube or somewhere else? Can you hear, sir?
Sankaran, can you hear us?
I lost you. Can anybody hear me?
A bit, not. Somehow we lost your voice for a few seconds. We're not able to hear.
Can anyone hear me?
Now we can hear you. Now we can.
Okay. I lost it completely, Akash.
Yeah. So Akash, it was really a wonderful session. We all enjoyed a lot. Even all of students, all of scholars, and even faculty members, they are writing. There's a long list of the comment which is praising about the whatever information we got it out. And this is what as a true researcher. So researcher translate whatever they have learned during the process. And this is what the true coming of a researcher. So I'm really, heartful and thankful to you for sharing your thought processes and giving the key idea for the young researchers, those who are either planning to start their research, either they're in the coursework or they have cleared their synopsis and writing the thesis, and it was quite wonderful and applicable for all. So I'm absolutely going with the idea and the word which is written by Sujay Chaudhary. No, this is something like shopping under a single mall, and you get everything shopping under a single window. So I'm really thankful to you, Professor, on the behalf of Office of Doctoral Studies, on the behalf of Untitled Global University, for sparing your precious time and engaging our students and letting enlightening all of us in this direction. I'll be very happy if we can invite you sometime when our campus is open. With your permission, if you allow, we would like to put this recording on our repository for the students, which is our students can access that entire video if you allow for that.
Thank you very much for all your kind words part of this session. And I hope all of you did enjoy, and it's useful for all of the research scholars in order to implement them as part of what they have gone through in this PhD journey. And definitely, yes, you can always put it in the repository that the scholars can always refer back and go through this. I know there are a lot of things that I've spoken about. As a scholar, they might want to go back and refer to, which is perfectly fine. You should always take this.
Thank you, Professor Raja. Thank you very much for your time, for your effort. And thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, scholars, and thank you, professors, for your presence. And I hope that it was, really, I can see with your comment that you enjoyed a lot. Even I enjoyed a lot, and I'm really thankful to Professor Raja for sparing time and enlightening us. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.